dramatic entrance. It is currently my intention that within the next few tapings that I was going to try via, you might say, a New Year's Eve gift, and it's going to specifically be my new creation myth, a story that I do predict, since people like to predict at the beginning of the year, that will perhaps blow some of you out of the 20th century, and simultaneously at least perhaps hog-tie, if not wrap up, a lot of the ideas and stuff I've talked about in 1989, especially the last few months. And probably the next time we tape, I'm going to, whether I mention it or not, it'll be that kind of trickery. I'm going to have to lay the groundwork, I think, to get the most possible efficacious use out of my story. But I do predict that Jean Dixon will dye her... No, I do predict that this may be a very interesting story. And I will put it all together between now and whenever we do it. But it's going to be the 21st century creation myth story. I've been laying the groundwork for the last few tapings, if anybody noticed, but never mind all that. Wipe it from your memory. Some other stuff. I wanted to point out a distinction, yet another one, between intellectual man and the other sentient creatures here. A very specific one. And it's this: that these other creatures here will submit. They will submit, for instance, to illness, discomfort, maltreatment, even death. Every other creature, when I say here, we're just talking about the sensual, three-dimensional world. They will submit. They got no choice, but they will submit. And the difference is that men are wired up in such areas I use for an example. They will struggle, they will fight, they will flee, they will pray, they will bargain, they will bribe, they will seek assistance, and otherwise do almost anything to, quote, not submit. Just take the areas, which are pretty straightforward, that I used for instances. Illnesses. Now, I'm not going to dwell, I'm not trying to get by the blues, but in case you think you missed what I said, other creatures, the higher mammals, if they're ill, they submit to it. And don't go off on let your intelligence carry off on some strange tangent, such as, well, orangutans and dogs don't have clinics. That's not the point. They are wired up in such a way that is one of the distinct differences between man, the intellectual being. The development of the nervous system is these very specific things that are a matter, so to speak, of life and death. That while other creatures will submit, they'll submit to mistreatment. Just take your own view of what mistreatment would be of another creature. Their own discomfort, their own death. When apparently it's time to die, they will lay down and die. It's not that it's wrong, but they submit. And there is a specific distinction between that and having what appears in man to be the function of intelligence. And part of its purpose is to keep man from submitting. And forget the anomalies of people who commit suicide, or people that a doctor says you're going to die and they go, well, phew, thank God, I was waiting for the day. Forget all that. Just general middle-class people, with a fairly healthy, ordinary nervous system, will fight death. Atheists will begin to pray. People who are discomforted will begin to beat up on their in-laws, their mother, their employer, even if they're just being even non-physically maltreated. Well, how dare you talk to me like that? They will take up praying, they'll attempt to bargain with the gods, they'll attempt to bribe fate, They'll run for it. They'll do almost anything to not submit. Now, at the ordinary level, well, surely without any great effort, you people can see that this helps in the expanded usefulness of man and man's horizons and such things as technology, an obvious one. That if people did not submit, to take an easy example, if man did not submit, if he were not wired up to not submit, we would not have air conditioning, for instance. We would not have heat. At this time of the year, most places are seeing this tape, when the weather gets at least fairly inclement, the temperature drops, would be like the cavemen were. You would just submit to it. Technology is an easy one to see, but one that is a bit, at least, less material would be the evolution of three-dimensional earthbound ideas themselves. As just at the ordinary level, man will not submit. Hence, part of the so-called march of history, the evolution of myths, of religious myths, for instance, from the orthodoxy to the reform to the liberal to the change in moralities. And it's not a matter of whether it's better or worse. It is a continuing expansion of the horizons of these secondary activities. But it has to be on the basis that men are wired up to not submit. Consider that to be a term, not submit. And I repeat again, this has to do with the energy of words themselves, and hence, in a parallel way, thought, because men are wired up to not submit to whatever the current philosophy, belief packages, thought systems of a particular area are. And it does not mean that you or anyone were necessarily a wild-eyed young Turk out marching in the streets rebelling against whatever they had. It's not necessarily that, but every generation, that is the continual expansion of life, every generation in a sense, it may be very gradual, may be very slight with the individual level, is not submitting or is engaged in not submitting. That everyone apparently that has a fairly reasonably operational intellect is questioning, they might put it, the prior generation's sense of morality, their beliefs, their science, their arts, that it's always change, always something going on. But there is not always something going on with any other sentient creature on this planet. If there's any change at all, it's a very, 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 very gradual mutation, and it's only on what appears to be the red circuit level, since they don't have an intellect anyway. That they may begin to lose their wings if their particular line has not had occasion to fly, or they got discouraged by the frequent flyer program that was available to their species, and so they quit flying. But it takes a while, and it does not necessarily change their attitude. Just, yeah, I guess you'll have to trust me. If dodos were still around and they didn't fly, it didn't necessarily change that they didn't like to fly. Who knows? They submit. There is a continual, all the way from what would appear to be easily described as intellectually, physically, artistically, politically, economically, as man is continually in a process of not submitting. Now, if you ask specifically, well, what have you got against the religion of your forefathers? What have you got against the political system as it is now? Why are you out here in the street throwing Molotov cocktails, raising hell? You know, I grew up and fought for this country. I'm your father. What did I do wrong with you? And the kid may say something. Well, after reading Marx, I've decided never to read again. No, I decided that. That's for those of you who ever tried to read Marx. I decided that I am not a capitalist, and down with the capitalistic system. They may say that, but that's not the point. That's just some more movement of energy. It's all right. But the real point is that man is the creature wired up here, singularly, to not submit. That's part of his job, is not to submit. And you can say, well, not submit to what? And the answer is, what you got. Whatever it is that the generation just in front of you, the leaves on a branch just closer to the trunk than you, the older leaves, whatever it is, the tune that they're whistling as they blow in the breeze, about economics, politics, art, music, whatever it is, that particular tune, you being a new leaf out here furling a limb, it is your job, it is your responsibility, and you cannot shirk it. Nobody tries. You cannot shirk it by looking back and going, tut, tut, tut. That is not submitting. That is part of the job. But to try and do this kind of stuff, may I point out, although that is part of the ordinary flow of life and the necessity for life's expansion through man, a real revolutionist, a real explorer, a real hero cannot submit even to this submission. You cannot agree to be ordinary. There's no need for definitions. It's just that. You cannot submit to the submission of ordinarily not submitting. And there's no question. There's no need to ask for any definition, for any exposition about, well, what if the people around me right now, that they're attempting not to submit to a certain thing, but what if that thing has some validity? It needs no definition. Don't bother me with that. That is, don't bother you with that. There's nowhere to look. It's part of the healthy part, the healthy areas of life's branching out in man, for them to not be submitting, to struggle not to submit to whatever was going on. And of course, if you look around, it varies. At the three-dimensional level, it varies greatly from person to person, not just in the degree to which they apparently do not want to submit, but in the areas. Such as, some people you say, what do you think of music nowadays? They may go, well, I am absolutely sick of what they were calling the new thing. What happened? Since the Sex Pistols and the Ramones got to be 40, there is no good music. What the hell is going on? And so this person seems very involved with not submitting to the prevailing taste and the changing taste of music. And then you turn around and sit right next to him and say, what do you think about people being all concerned about what's happening in popular music? And you find out this person right over here, perhaps educated, good job, driving a clean car, and you find out this person cannot tell the difference between music and a fire siren going off. That they're just tone deaf. And they say, well, I don't care. But then you might find out that they are very politically aware. And so their area, their particular job is to not submit politically. So you have everywhere. Again, people do not have to be out in the street marching by any means. That is a minority. But everyone else, inside their own nervous system, they've got no choice. Any more than a dog has any choice of trying to fight discomfort. That is a kind of just discomfort to be native. We'll say a wolf so that you don't get involved with domesticated animals. They've got no ability, they're not wired up to not submit to whatever discomfort is going on. It's just there. In that same way, ordinary people have no ability to not submit. They are not submitting, even if they seem to be the absolute living example of John Q. Boob Public, the middle class, the bourgeoisie. They are still not submitting in some ways, or else life would be dead. There would be no growth going on. So they are wired to not submit. And you may not be able to see it. You may think that your father, your grandfather, you may have some example that your own nervous system right now may tell you, well, now, if there was somebody that submitted and just went along, it was my old uncle so-and-so. That's not true. If it were true, he was really an anomaly. He was a negative mutant because he did not. Anybody, any ordinary person that's religious at all is not submitting. Anybody who is afraid to die is not submitting. Anybody that will go see a doctor when they're sick is not submitting. Anybody that will turn on the air conditioner when it gets too hot, etc. They are not submitting. It may appear to you that, well, that's not very radical. It is over the long range, not just individually, over the long range and over the general population of humanity, that every generation, I'm just using that as a spatial and, of course, I know apparently temporal checking point, but it's as though every generation is not submitting in varying ways, varying degrees, to the prior generation. But what it is a continual movement of energy through life itself, and the latest movements are having to push against the earlier movements. They're having to. And so they are attempting to not submit. To do this, that's not enough. No matter what you had thought up until now that, well, I was brought up to be a Baptist or a Jew or a Catholic, but I'm going to tell you what, long before I got involved with this, I'd become critical. Now, I don't mean in some smart-ass way, but I began to consider it and study comparative religion. I did not submit just blindly to some faith system. That was nothing. You should know that. Didn't get you anywhere. That was part of not submitting. Ordinarily. But that kind of not submitting won't take you any further. Because you cannot submit to that. It's not just funniness with words. If you called ordinary life, if you called every generation a form of rebellion against their prior generation, then you got to understand this. You have got to be a revolutionist within a rebellion. You have got to be, I guess, a sixth columnist within a fifth column organization. In other words, you have got to be in there with the Greeks and the Trojan horse, waiting, to get in there and take care of Agamemnon and all those bastards. But you got to be inside there, taking secret notes and photographs, plotting against the Greeks while you're in there with them. It's that kind of thing. What appears to be the kind of rebellion going on, even if it's at a subtle level, even if it appears to be sophisticated, if it's big enough for you to have already noticed it, then it's not good enough. That is simply the mechanically wired up, primed, non-submission that everybody, all sane, reasonable, middle class, middle of life body, men and women, are responsible for. A real revolutionist cannot submit even to that kind of submission. Those of you that, if you were involved with Sit-Wadath, that be? I was trying to make it an acronym. The continual thinking remember, when you don't have to sit, well, sit with us. All right, sit. That kind of effort to continually think when you don't have to could be seen by a more manifold eye of a real revolutionist as being both simultaneously the cause and the source of a more complex new intelligence, that is, not submitting to not submitting. It could be seen both as the source of it and also as the product of it. God, I was afraid of that. All right. Continually thinking when you don't have to could be seen as the cause, as a motivator, as a producer of new intelligence. Not more intelligence, new intelligence. But, if I got to remind you, I'm trying to prepare for a few days from now. That was sotto voce. It could be seen, that is, continually thinking when you do not have to, as a producer of new intelligence. But it could also be seen as the end product, as the result of new intelligence. It gets dangerously close to that kind of unholy, unavailable merger that I mentioned a few tapings back, wherein like the means and the ends merge. That the medium and the message itself become one, that the producer and the consumer are now the same. Let's just press right along as though enough of you are hanging on to the train. I need to remember to translate or figure out maybe some of you read, there's a Japanese word. Of course it's Japanese because it happens in Japan, as you'll see, I was going to say. But there's a name for a particular job description on their subways and their trains. It's somebody that their job, they're paid, is to go and to push people. But it's got to be after the train or the subway's already started and there are people trying to get on. It's only then that they go and help push people, and I guess kick them off the platform to help those get on once it started. So, whatever the term was, I can't even remember. But let's go ahead and pretend that enough of you picked up that job description off of what I just said, and we'll move on to another paragraph. Makes sense to me. All right. It is this, that from a more complex view of the great P&L problem, profit and loss, at a local level, from this more complex view, there is an unrecognized, undiagnosed dynamic at work, and that is that men are ordinarily bound to things that are either too small or too large. That is, that they are either bound to, and right now I'm just speaking about ordinary arrangements, but that men are either bound to things that are too small. That is, such as their own petty self-criticisms and complaints about themselves. Or else they're bound to things that are too large. Then it becomes their fears and their aggressions directed out there. They're apparent out there. In either case, the attempt to develop a new intelligence by being so bound to ill-appropriate sizes of things too large, too small, will absolutely cement and stabilize one's ordinary position and view. That is, you can't ever get out of old intelligence. You can't ever expand your own thinking as long as you are bound to, as you're supposed to be, bound to, I said things, ideas, causes, concerns. Oh, won't we just say thoughts that are either too large or too small. Now let us shift as much as possible into something that might resemble, if not new thinking, at least neo-old thinking. That instead of saying that they're too large or too small, you got to first realize that that is not a problem, because I am never pointing out problems with life since there are none. If I start pointing out problems, I assume that somebody will finally show me the way to an open grave. It'll be my time and I just didn't realize it. It's not that anything is wrong, but do note, even at the ordinary level, I could get ordinary intelligence, probably many people, to agree with this, that if I said men by and large, or a lot of times men are too caught up, too bound to activities, concerns that are either too large for them or too small. And I could get many ordinary people to go, yeah, that's true. Especially if I point out a few examples, like, all right, if it's too small, it's men whose consciousness, their thinking is almost totally turned on themselves, and they're always concerned about how do I look, and how much weight have I lost, and how much money do I have, and how come nobody likes me, and all that. And ordinary intelligence might go, yeah, I know people like that. And I could say, I bet you do. Well, don't we all? Quite well. And I could also, I submit, get ordinary intelligence to agree if I said, and contraire withal, many men are too involved, too tied up with things that are too large. For instance, people who apparently are driving themselves crazy over whether the degree of destruction of the Brazilian rainforest is moving at such an irreversible speed that we'll all be done for by this time next month. And even if we are, what can one man do? And I can get many people of ordinary intelligence say, you're right. And we're not agreeing that something shouldn't be done, but if people are going to worry about, well, what's the sense in going to school or trying to lose any weight because, hell, they don't fool me. The Cold War is not over. The communists are probably going to attack us next week just when we think it's all over, and I'll be killed, and I wasted my time even signing up for night school. And people who apparently sit around and drive themselves crazy worrying about, well, hey, especially I read that they say it's almost a certainty that within the next 50 million years, our sun is going to burn out. And you think, well, how silly to sit around and worry about that, right? All right, so I can get ordinary people, you hear me, to probably agree that, yeah, under certain conditions, you are correct for once. You're being sane for a change, that people can get involved with either problems or interests that are too small. They're so petty, they're so meaningless that they're wasting their lives, their talents, their potential. Or they're so large that they're likewise involved with absolutely losing battles. It's something that individuals are impotent to ever change, so they forget it. But no one is wired and primed up at the ordinary level to retain that kind of awareness, even to think about it, past the point of me speaking to somebody about it for a second. Then they would walk right out. Or if you want to take what apparently is a form, you got to see it though as being a more complex irony. What if I told somebody that ordinarily and they went, boy, that is something. And they took that as being their new problem. They could go out with that and think, Jesus, I've got to stop that. He's correct. Many, many people are like that, and I'm going to go on a crusade and stop it. In other words, you'd walk right out and forget about it. They could not contain in their own nervous system that thought pattern, that idea, that map. So, ordinary people are not wired and primed up to have any continuing thinking about, any awareness that what they're doing, what seems to be their prime interest in life, their main concerns are either too large or too small for them. They do not. Nobody can think that way because they're not at the ordinary level too large or too small. Because if the areas of interest, let's call them problems, the easiest thing to describe, what appears to be the problems, if men picked out in some way, could pick out problems that were not too large and not too small, but, as the third little bear said, were just right, then look at the danger, to say the least. Forget about the loss of the rainforest. If men picked out problems that were just right and could fix them, as they call it, you don't need to worry about the ozone layer and the rainforest. We're all goners. Because everybody fixed life right up. Instead of it being an apparent, almost infinitely sized maypop, a tire that's going to blow in about an unknown number of directions, you'd suddenly have all these people all over the planet putting on little galvanized patches and it'd be fixed. And forget an atomic warfare, it'd be boom, we'd all be done for. Everything would stop. There'd be no growth because there'd be no growth. So, from one view, what would apparently be the reality of people being bound to areas of interest and problems and ideas that are either too large or too small, from that kind of description, which of course is arbitrary, flawed, and less than a full representation of a more complex reality, all of that notwithstanding, from that view, people are supposed to be bound to and attracted to problems either too large or too small. That is, they cannot cure them. They cannot treat them adequately. They cannot patch them up. That's the whole point. That, well, as people say, well, maybe I can't change the world. Maybe I can't stop people from reading pornography. But by God, I'll drive them nuts going around hollering, what's that you're reading? I'll go down fighting. I may not be able to make everybody in the world see that they should be a Methodist, but by God, my final breath, I'll be hollering, God bless John Wesley or whoever it was. Be a Methodist. In other words, you can't win, but that's not going to stop me from fighting. Why else did Leonard and Lowell write Camelot? Or why else did they write The Man from La Mancha? If you're not going to fight unbeatable foes and dream impossible dreams. So, that's another way, that's a crude way that happens in life of me saying, although men cannot measure it in this way, they're not supposed to, that they are continually attracted to, involved with interests, projects, ideas, beliefs, feelings, the whole schmear of things that are either too large or too small. That is, they will never come to any fruitful, satisfying conclusion. They're not supposed to. You're supposed to be fighting enemies, taking problems, pursuing hobbies that are either too large or too small for you. Now, beyond that area, if you're trying to develop, if you're trying to find your own place to grow new intelligence, you have got to realize that staying in the position of being bound to whatever they are, of the interest, the areas you saw as problems that you had before you got involved with this, and it don't matter what it was, and it doesn't matter what your background was, it doesn't matter your sex, race, religion, blah, blah, blah. Whatever it was that you were bound to, you have got to see that you've got to abandon that. Not because it was right or wrong, not because the area that you were interested in, such as the destruction of the rainforest, let us say. It's not that that has no validity. Of course, that got no validity, but not that it has no... Not that the rainforest doesn't have validity. It's that your damn concern for it doesn't have any validity is the point. But you have got to see that whatever your interests were in life that you're already bound to, you have got to see that all that was a pair of New Jersey boots. It absolutely is going to submit you, not to the bottom necessarily of the Hudson River in this case, but it's going to submit you right where you are, and you'll never be able to move. And if you stay right where you are, you'll always have the same view. And if you've got the same view, no matter what it is, whether you're in the Hudson River, the Mississippi River, your view is where it was, and it's not going to change, and it will not accommodate, to say the least, new intelligence. So it's not just that any interest that a man may have been wired up to have, such as, well, what I'm going to do is make the whole world sing. No, I'm sorry, Coca-Cola already undertook that. What I'm going to do, and there are people working on hunger, what I'm going to do, a man might say, is I'm going to pursue the noble course of what I want is free or affordable plastic surgery for everyone in the world that needs it. You know, even the poor, people in third world countries, is plastic surgery so that everybody will feel better. All right, it's ridiculous. Not plastic surgery, but trying to get it for everybody. I mean, it's just the logistics involved. You've got to see that no matter that the aim, what it was that you were wired up to be interested in, might have by all three-dimensional observations, laudable aims and ends, you simply got to see whether it seems to be laudable or non-laudable, that it is a matter of a kind of almost death-threatening stability, that you simply stay there fighting or pursuing interests, problems, ideas that are too small, they're too petty, they're too personal. I'm giving you the crude description again. Or they're too big. That is, they're apparently too large out there, in the apparent out there. In either case, it has nothing to do, it will not feed, it will not fuel new intelligence. Since I saw everyone's eyes sparkle earlier, as soon as I mentioned profit and loss, because I know how many of you just love the area of economics, how about this? Why stop now? There are more than economic aspects of something else. How about the great, as it's known contemporarily, the great trickle-down theory? A kind of variation, I guess they blame it or accredit it now to the last few somewhat Whiggish administrations here in our part of the world, in our country, of the old supply side. But the trickle-down theory, everybody knows, don't you, that it's like, see that, still I'll stay with economic for a second, the springboard, see that the upper areas of society are well upholstered. That the well-to-do are doing well. See, if that's true, and if that's true, then the health at the upper echelons of society, the upper economic stratas, then once the Mellons and the Rockefellers and et cetera, even that they're being gouged more and more gorge more and more with new funds, that finally it'll just begin to run out their ears. That if we give enough tax and corporate breaks to General Motors, that they'll make so much money, and they'll be left over that they'll open up new plants, new businesses. That, in other words, the theory is, if the higher areas of the economy are doing well, even if they don't want to, it's just laws of nature, as economists would want to put it, that these profits, the health, economic health, will trickle down, and the people at the lower levels will benefit. Perforce. All right, there are more than economic aspects to the trickle-down theory. For instance, would you be better served if you were in a structure where the power and authority apparently came from above? Let's say for a second from, in my allegorical worlds and maps, yellow circuit, from the area of capital as opposed to labor. Would you be better off? Would you be better served if you were in such a structure that the power seemed to flow from above, the benefits? Or would you be better served if apparently the power, the authority, seemed to rise up from below? Again, back to my paradigmatic maps. Apparently, let us say, from the red circuit areas, from what would be the pool of labor as opposed to capital. I guess I was being funny saying how much I knew that you people enjoyed economic springboards. But nonetheless, we've put our foot in it. Would a real revolutionist, somebody attempting to develop new intelligence, would you be better ruled if what seemed to be the power of this, the potential of it, if it seemed to come from above? Let's wrap up type some of my idea maps of the yellow circuit, which is not incorrect. But how about more back to the political/economic realities of the apparent out there? Would a real revolutionist be better if he was under a kind of system? And now I'll take it all internally. There would be more on the basis that the authority was coming about through royal decree, and that kind of monolithic government, that in some way the power, the decisions were just, they came down. You know what a royal decree is, or another version, the grace of God, which of course many of those who used to deal in royal decrees claim that that was the person that hired them to start with, that they came up with royal decrees by the grace of God. I didn't choose to be a Stuart or a Windsor. No. God just, He made me one, and told me to go forth as a Bourbon, and kick the French around and straighten them out. But would a real revolutionist, would somebody attempting to do this kind of stuff, would you be better off if you were internally being ruled, apparently, with power coming from above, which would be similar in an external allegory to that kind of monolithic royal rule by the grace of God, that the directions just come from above, simply on the basis that they come from above, that this is what's going to happen? Or would you be better off, not just ordinarily now, but a real revolutionist, or would you be better off if that same power, the power that you need to direct whatever is going on in you, if it seemed to arise more from like the democratic will of the people, that is, from apparently below? That, at least in my opinion, and I'm the one doing the sketching, whether you're following it or enjoying it, of course, if you're following it, you're enjoying it. That in the ordinary world, that is a scenario bringing in enough extremes in the apparent out there world that you can swim and touch all sides that you need to. If it goes all the way from politically out there, there would appear to be the power, the authority, the direction of what I'm doing as a state, me as a country, as a peoples, that what I'm doing, the direction seems to come from the democratic will of the people, of the masses of me. Or what direction seems to be coming from me, and we're talking about now some kind of direction, some kind of authority that is not the everyday submission, that the authority, as opposed to that kind of external allegory of the democratic will of the people, that is coming from a sole source. It comes about through the same sort of description as just simply royal decree, or the grace of God, the voice of God, that just says, well, this is what we're going to do. You have room for all possible inflections and new areas to stick your intellectual nose into between those extremes of royal decree to democratic will of the people. In which way might one be better served? Well, let's drastically change the subject, because I know so many of you so deeply enjoy anything having to do with economics that I know that we don't want to see you pig out, be overcome. So pick up from a few times back something else when I was talking about myths. The heroic myth of all sorts, all the way from religions. I'm not in any manner confining this to myths you know about, things you don't call myths, things you do call myths, because I'll take it all the way as far as you can go with it. Anything you ever thought about to some degree is a myth, if you don't understand that. But all the way from pagan myths to Christian myths, to Jewish myths, to Buddhist myths, to chivalrous myths, to democratic myths, to royal myths, all of them. But all the myths that apparently are the ones fitting the old definition of myths, the heroic ones always have what? They always have a hero, but then what's the hero up to? It's not just that once upon a time there's a hero, the end. Or once upon a time there's a hero and he sat down and ate breakfast and then went to work. The end. A heroic myth not only has a hero, but the hero is always up to something. In all parts of the world, at all times, the myth is always this: that the hero goes off on a heroic quest. He has to go from his present world somewhere else. And the somewhere else, this quest, this heroic quest, is always this, though. The quest from your present world is always either off to some new depth, going into the bowels of hell, Dante, into the infernos, or else it's out to some distance. These mystical Norse explorers, even Hansel and Gretel, they always go off from a distance from where they went, or it's going to some new height. Dreams of people sailing away with the gods. Notice, the heroic quest is always limited to one of the three dimensions. And yet it still has to qualify as a heroic quest. But it's always either to some depth, some height, or to some distance. And then within those confines, which is all right for ordinary affairs, they have to turn that into a heroic quest. But do you hear me? How heroic can you be if you're still tied to the same dimensions? And so then that's when they have to come up with such things as, he went to a great depth and therein found little red horned demons that tried to fight him, tried to make him listen to Don Ho records, made him develop severe blisters on his feet. Or he went off to some great distance. He left his world and went off somewhere the likes of which he had never seen, and as soon as he got to a certain bend in the road, it was a dragon. Something that nobody's ever seen. No such thing. But it has to be. Or if he goes to some great height, he gets up there and what is there? They're flying serpents. There's some sort of demons or some sort of unidentified flying accountants from other planets or somewhere, attorneys, things that will torture the man. He has to fight them. The point I was trying to get to right quick, can you hear me? As long as the stories, which they've got to be, since ordinary intelligence are the ones that are the transmitting units for these myths, their great heroic quest, and the real quotation marks, these heroic quests are still within the confines of 3 dimensions, which is the confines of the intelligence conveying and telling the myths. And so then they have to make up, as it were, that which you people are laughing, whether you knew why you were laughing. If you were laughing properly, here's why you were laughing. They go off on a great heroic myth, quest, and you can say, well, it is something to have to fight a dragon. But then you got to say, well, there are no such thing as dragons as far as I know. All right? And then you say, well, as literate, as intriguing and stimulating as it may be to your intellect to read Dante's Inferno, or Ahab and them fighting Moby Dick, but whatever you may say, well, there they are fighting all these demons of greed and avarice and all that. Now I say, yeah, but there's no such thing. You go, oh, yeah, you're right. In other words, they have to place that which apparently, though, if you had not analyzed it, or attempting to analyze it from something resembling a new way, that does seem like heroic quest to go off and to fight giants, to fight flying dragons, to fight death. What could be a greater heroic quest? That's no heroic quest. A real revolutionist, or a real revolutionist hero would be the one who would be on the quest for new intelligence. That is, I suggest to you, the nonverbal, the more primal, relatively speaking, primordial energy behind the myths of heroic quest having to do with fighting demons, gods, serpents, that is, material entities, real or imagined. But that the real revolutionary hero would be someone whose quest was new intelligence. And to do so, you have got to locate another dimension. You cannot be dealing with anything, with any dimension, not just 3 dimensions, but any of the 3 that can produce anything definable. Because just if suddenly, if we're all wrong, or if I'm wrong, that yeah, there are such things as dragons, in the dimension of height, the force of height, just for instance, can suddenly produce a dragon. That's still not enough. It wouldn't do you any good if you could slay the dragon. It wouldn't do you any good if you could eat the dragon, if he was information. Because you have still got a jaundice. You have still got one view. You have still got one piece of the latest health update from life. You've got 1/3 of it. So even if you kill the dragon, you hadn't killed anything. If you consume him, you hadn't done anything. The real heroic quest for new information would have to be in an area that is beyond the 3 dimensions. Don't you hear that? Me saying it was adversaries like dragons and that, rather than look at it as being going off on the ordinary heroic quest to go fight something. How about it's the ordinary quest to go out and to find something then? To go find a treasure. To go find a treasure that's up in the heavens. To go find something hidden of great value that's down below. Or something, the infinite secret, but it's way off in the distance. That's still in the 3 dimensions. And if you go off way off in the distance, take distance as being breadth or width, and you go way off, you go off to Tibet or Patterson or Venus, and if you go there, whatever you find won't be enough. I don't care what's there. If it came from that dimension, or the old dreams, a good mess of fly up to the heavens with my good, nowadays it wouldn't be wax, I guess, it would be PVC wings. So take me further, and I'll get up to the heavens, to the sun gods. And if you fly up and you can make the sun and your wings don't melt and you get there and you speak to Father Saul, whatever he's got to tell you is going to come from one dimension, height. And he doesn't know any more than you do. Oh, it sounds like more, but it's not new intelligence. There may be more intelligence, but he's still only got one-dimensional view. So even if apparently you're fighting foes or apparently up to gaining some boon, whatever you get, if it comes within the confines of any of the three dimensions, it's not new. It is not liberating. You have got to find a new place to look. It's got to be beyond three dimensions. Any height, width, or depth that you may plumb, fly, or visit won't do. You may have more information. You may have more intelligence. But may I recall for you, last time we were taping, some of you had a glimpse of the fact. Now, I was noting that I never refer to this as more information because it's not. There's not more intelligence. It's new. Because you can get all the more intelligence you want. Or as opposed to the operation, the verb, if you want to look at it as a noun, you can get all the more additional information, not just the intellectualization of it, but the information itself. But it's not going to change anything. You just got now, whatever direction you went in, you now have more information about greater distances. I only used to have information from here, over to just that little hillet, the one right over there. Just that's as far as I went. But now, after years of struggle and effort, I now have information about distances at least 10 miles. All right, 10 million miles past that little hillet. So what? I mean, it's a hobby, but if you think that that's going to create any kind of new intelligence that used to, I only had information. I could only be intellectual about from here down to 4th Street. But now, after 30 years of hard work, I have information, let's say darn comprehensive information, about from here to 4,769th Street. Huh? So what have you got? You've got additional information. That is, you may have more intelligence now in a straight line than you did. Or used to only had information to an altitude of, about 5 feet 11 inches. But now, after years of work and taking drugs and doing all sorts of things, I have information. I can now be intelligent somewhere close to 32 to 37,000 feet. So, the information, anything available within the dimensions here, is not the heroic quest. It will not produce new intelligence. To be a real adventurer, explorer, revolutionist, a real hero, only to yourself, no one else, you cannot submit to any quest that is already defined and limited for you by the known stimuli of the extant words to describe the quest. That is, if you will submit to any quest that has already been described, whether it comes from some church, from some guru, from some professor, if you will submit to that, you're done for. You're not going anywhere. You are on a heroic quest, all right, in one direction, and it's a hobby. But a real explorer, a real revolutionist cannot submit to any known quest. There's none are better, none are worse, none are right, none are wrong. But if the quest has already been described, that is defined, I remind some of you that this is still, I'm trying to trickily lay some groundwork for my New Year's and perhaps decade gift in the next few nights. Back to where we were. If it has been defined, if it's been described, the limits are there. There's no way out. So any quest that anybody, I repeat, any quest that anybody can describe to you, whether in person, apparently from afar, spatially or temporally, through books, through writing, if it can be described, the limits are already there. If it can be described, it is not a heroic quest. If it can be described, it is not a quest, it is not a journey, it is not a travel in any more than one direction. He's out there, up there, and down there. That's it. You cannot submit to it. If any of you hear that, and if any of you still have any uncertainties, at least there, if you knew how to use it, is an absolute, ready-made, always available checkpoint Charlie for your own brain. Where are you going to go? Well, all right, can anybody tell me where to go? And somebody says, well, yes. Well, immediately discount that. Can you tell me where to go? And it's as though the heavens, all possible forces, trees, plants, little opossums, inchworms and footworms, and they all says, yes, we can tell you. All right, take all of that and just immediately discount it. And it's all right, what's left? What's left? No. Everybody who spoke and told me they knew what to do, everybody in the universe that said that, and I'll go, yeah, yeah, yeah. You say, all right, well, you people be quiet now. All right, now, anybody that didn't speak, could I now hear, what would you suggest I do? Because if it can be defined, it's already been limited. And I'm using limited, underline, and capital letters. In other words, it is for a revolutionary, for travel purposes, it is at the very least a four-dimensional cul-de-sac. There is no way out of it. It is going nowhere other than, apparently, in a secondary way, in one direction. But it will not give you new information. It seems to be more information that, well, all right, I know more about this direction. So what is the point? Not cynically, but so what? That is not new information. That's more information. And it is not a heroic quest because it will not change the way in which you can see. Your position is the same. I only look this way. But after 40 years, I can look a foot further than I used to. Well, wrap up. 2 minutes. How about this? In fact, I guess this will be the last taping of this wonderful year. All right, here's a wrap up. One that a lot of you like. Back to the area of humanity and their AI dreams, artificial intelligence dreams. All this continual babble that I mentioned several times, going on about the dreams of tomorrow's computer. The descriptions they have of the breathtaking functions that tomorrow's computers will be able to execute. May I translate that for you? And listen fast, you people that may be just seeing this. It's no attack on computers and people involved with computers, but it has to do with something else. All of that, the promise, these dreams of the great new abilities that tomorrow's computer will have, what are they actually saying? These praises are being sung. Here's what they're saying. That these great new machines of tomorrow will be able to follow, can still be able to follow new instructions. Either some of you people are not listening or some of you are trying to take it personally. What are they saying? That these great new machines of tomorrow, these great new computers, what are they saying? These great new things they're going to be able to do. What is these great new things they're going to be able to do? They're going to be able to still follow instructions. May I ask you to consider this as a way of consideration and suggestion, that this is not totally unlike man's continual dreams that he's always had of his own tomorrow, wherein he will be able to do all of the new stuff that he's going to be made to do. That we will be able to faithfully, vigorously, and heroically do all the kind of stuff that we're going to have to do anyway. All right? No. Could you not almost see that it's better to be foolishly hopeful, if not cynical, about the questionable future of a machine than it is yourself? Bye.